Da, 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 da.
Bitch, I got my racks up, I didn't wanna tax us, so I gotta keep all my receipts. Like you with a red dot, if a pussy red hot, if a bitch wanna take something from me. But who gon' come and heal my pain if everything depends on me? I ain't have no backup, gonna get this cash up, I'ma fuck the world with no plan B. So I came up out the mud with my fucking gang. Everybody and they mama finna know my name. I'm just tryna make this rap shit worth the pain. Last year I was broke, knew it had to change. So I got up on my feelings and inside my bag. Started working on the phones, we was making plays. I can't see my mama cry another fucking day. Unless it's by the only son out here getting paid. I treat this shit like war, I'm a fucking soldier. I don't really do no talking, but I fucking told you. All these bitches sleeping on me like they in a coma. Shorty used to try to curb me, now she bending over. Cause bitch, I got my racks up, I didn't wanna tax us, so I gotta keep all my receipts. Like you with a red dot, leave a pussy red hot, if a bitch wanna take something from me. But who gon' come and heal my pain if everything depends on me? I ain't have no backup, gonna get this cash up, I'ma fuck the world with no plan B. I always starve myself in the stress, I can never help myself in a mess. Only use for women right now is some sex. Little shorty standing on her knees, then she blessed. I can't make no mistake, bitch, I'm tryna escape. Stress got me sipping so strong on a weekday. Shorty said she missed me, know it's kinda risky. Know these bitches off and lie on me. So I gotta slide out with a Ruger. When I pop out, I'ma do ya. All these pills going right through ya. Now we rollin', rollin', rollin'. Bitch, I got my racks up, I didn't wanna tax us, so I gotta keep all my receipts. Like you with a red dot, leave a pussy red hot, if a bitch wanna take something from me. But who gon' come and heal my pain if everything depends on me? I ain't have no backup, gonna get this cash up, I'ma fuck the world with no plan B. My head's so messed up, but I can't fold in no fear. Got sex shit right up on these bands, and I'm gonna use to wipe tears. 5 years still sticking to the plans I made when I was a jit. Told moms I can't go live no normal life, won't stop till I'm rich. Said where were you when I was down bad, and the money coming to me so fast. Left the hoe, she a big dog, straightforward with it, I don't go back. Everybody living better, I still remember times we done broke down. Tried it on this come up, I gotta get a bag for the fam now. But I got nobody to lean on, got a cold heart in a cold world. Ever since you left, I don't know what's next, I ain't found closure. I keep a knife in my chest just to cut holes off, I don't know 'em. Leaving a bitch in the past, I gotta go now, it's over. Left me out here grieving. Shit don't add up, baby, I'ma get even. It's a cold world, baby, and I'm just getting heated. So I'm the only one I ever really needed. I gotta find a way out of this fucking position. I stay with a gang and don't stress by no bitches. I took all my pain and I put it in records. They turn up the speaker, I turn it to riches. When I'm alone, the past come at behind me, so I feel like turning that boy to a Casper. When I'm off whiskey, I feel like myself and I'll turn that beat up, 'cause it really don't matter. I got my mind on my money, paranoid, they all look at me funny. Stressed out, so my liver stay muddy. Pipe down, you won't take nothing from me. I don't need nobody
Para sa'yo, mami. Nobody ka pa, mami.
Can't say that I'm lucky, shit done changed, bitch, stay away from me. I got nobody to lean on, got a cold heart in a
Are.
cold world. Ever since you left, I don't know what's next, I ain't found closure. I keep a knife in my chest just to cut holes off, I don't know 'em. Leaving a bitch in the past, I gotta go now, it's over. Left me out here grieving. Shit don't add up, baby, I'ma get even.
It's a cold, baby, and I'm just getting here.
So I'm the only one I ever really needed. I got nobody to lean on, got a cold heart in a cold world. Ever since you left, I don't know what's next, I ain't found closure. I keep a knife in my chest just to cut holes off, I don't know 'em. Leaving a bitch in the past, I gotta go now, it's over. Left me out here grieving. Shit don't add up, baby, I'ma get even. It's a cold world, baby, and I'm just getting heated.
Hello everyone, this is Juan from Ken Hub and welcome to another anatomy tutorial where this time we're going to be talking about the muscles of the ventral trunk. So what we're going to be doing here on this tutorial is looking at this image and describing the different muscles that define the ventral trunk, so the anterior part or front part of your trunk. So basically we're going to be describing the different thoracic muscles and also some of the abdominal muscles that define the anterior portion of the thorax and also the abdomen. So as you would probably expect, right now we're looking at the interior view of the thorax and abdomen, so an interior view of the trunk, where we can see the different muscles that we're going to be talking about on this tutorial. But before I do so, I would like to list the different muscles of the ventral trunk. And these include the abdominal muscles, the intercostal and subcostal muscles, the transversus thoracis, the serratus anterior, the pectoralis major and minor, the subclavius, and the cremaster. We're going to start off by talking about the first. And the cremaster. We're going to start off by talking about the first list of muscles, which are the abdominal muscles, which you can see now on the image on the right side. And the list includes the rectus abdominis muscle, the pyramidalis muscle, the external oblique, the internal oblique, the transversus abdominis muscle. So these are the abdominal muscles that define the ventral trunk. We're going to start off with this one that you see here highlighted in green, which is known as the rectus abdominis. The muscle is passing through what is known as the rectus sheath, which is a tendinous
मैं
muscle.
पहले कर चुका हूँ, मैं पहले वो करूँगा इसको बाद में. हाँ, यहाँ से स्टार्ट करते हैं.
And we're going to start off with this one that you see here, or these that you see highlighted in green, which are known as the external intercostal muscles. They originate from the lower border of a rib and then run ventrocaudally to the upper border of the rib below. Ventrocaudal from the lower border of a rib and
Okay.
then run ventrocaudally
वेंट्रोकॉर्डली क्या होता है? अच्छा, ओके 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 ओके, गॉट इट। मतलब कि वेंट्रो या फिर एंटीरियो इंफीरियरली बोल सकते हैं ना, ऐसे है ना, क्लियर? वेंट्रोकॉर्डली कैन बी आल्सो रेफर टू एज एंटेरो इंफीरियरली। एम आई राइट और एम आई राइट? बोल। अरे 5। अरे मेरे को आवाज नहीं आती, सॉरी सॉरी। बोल बोल। सॉरी। हाँ। Oof. Fuck.
To the upper border of the rib below. Eventually, these muscles are bordered by the external below. Ventrocaudally, these muscles upper border of rib, and then run ventrocaudally to the upper border of the rib below. Eventually, these muscles are bordered by the external thoracic fascia. The innervation of the external intercostal muscles come from
మర్చిపోతే ఏం కాదా
ఏం కాదురా
भाई हेलो हेलो
हाँ बोल
Actually,
भाई कहाँ से आ गया मैं कौन सी दुनिया में आ गया हेलो हेलो
it's better to rotate.
हाँ हाँ बोल रहे हैं
मेरे को ड्रैग किसने किया एक्स को सबने ड्रैग
मैंने
किया
किया
व्हाट हैपेंड
करा रे
एक क्लियर रहा
अच्छा अच्छा
क्रैक बन गया
अच्छा क्लियर नहीं किया
अच्छा
अरे
చెప్పండి,
సిటీ
it's
వరా
better
సిటీ
to
వరా
rotate.
సిటీ వరా
మిడ్ లో విట్రా జాయింట్ మిడ్ లో విషయం.
మిడ్ల లేరని మోరా
मनीष खेल रहा है क्या
ఇంకా ఎవరు ముగ్గురు
अरे नहीं मैं पढ़ रहा था बे लेट नाइट खेलूंगा मैं 4 AM
I have
क्लियर अगर 4 बजे तक जगेगी तो खेल लेंगे नहीं तो टील्स आर ऑफ
mid.
अभी नहीं आना पढ़ना चालू कर दे देख अब मैं पढ़ने वाले मोड में आ चुका हूँ अब मैं एक बार जो मैंने कमिटमेंट कर ली फिर मैं अपने आप क्यों नहीं सुनता समझ रही है तू हाँ अगर मैं खेलना चालू कर देता फिर कोई कोई किसी का बाप मेरे को पढ़ने नहीं बिठा पाता बट अब मैंने पढ़ना स्टार्ट कर दिया तो फिर कोई मैं फिर खेलने का बन गया लेट लेट कितनी देर तक जाएगी तू कितने बजे सोएगी ये बता आई थिंक आई कैन कैच यू प्लेइंग बोल जल्दी बोल जल्दी बोल जल्दी अच्छा गुड नाइट देन क्या होता है मैं अभी खेलूंगी नाइट में नहीं क्यों अरे खेल लियो मॉर्निंग खेल लियो क्या हो गया अभी सो ले मैं तेरे को 4 बजे फोन करके उठा दूंगा ओ क्या है मॉर्निंग में कॉलेज जाना है क्या ओ भाई पढ़ाकू लोग यार मेरे पे मैं पहले खेल लेता हूँ ना फिर पढ़ा नहीं जाता अगर पहले खेल लेता हूँ पहले पढ़ लेता हूँ तो खेल लेता हूँ
मनीष
चल ठीक है कल खेलते हैं दिन में
जल्दी
आई मीन कल क्या परसों अब जब ही खेलूंगा अगले मंथ मोस्टली हाँ दिखा ना
जल्दी एक्सप्लेन कर डैडी का रिपोर्ट है ये
भाई क्लियर से पूछ वो 3rd ईयर में यार मैं तो 1st ईयर में हूँ ब्रो देखा क्या है एवरीथिंग लुक्स गुड कंसर्न सीरम क्रिएटिनिन तो उनके किडनी फंक्शन में दिक्कत है क्रिएटिनिन लेवल ज्यादा है
लिवर फंक्शन कैल्शियम
विटामिन B12
1.74
विटामिन डी कम है विटामिन डी तो सब में ही कम होता है HbA1 ये पता नहीं क्या है अच्छा हीमोग्लोबिन सॉरी हीमोग्लोबिन कम है
3 मंथ्स एवरेज है
हाँ ये तो अच्छा अच्छा और कंप्लीट हीमोग्लोबिन भी कम है तो हीमोग्लोबिन कम कैसे हो गया बे
1.74 है ये थोड़ा स्लाइटली हाई है हीमोग्लोबिन बहुत ब्लड लॉस था ना लास्ट
हाँ राइट
आयरन डेफिशिएंसी एनीमिया
अच्छा यूरिया सीरम भाई सब
यूरिया
क्या
लास्ट टाइम 100 था बे थोड़ा कम हो गया थोड़ा
तो किडनी प्रॉब्लम हो गई है क्या अभी अंकल को
किडनी के लिए हाँ किडनी मतलब बहुत सारे एंटीबायोटिक्स ले रहे थे ना
राइट हाँ हाँ
बहुत हाई
तभी तो
स्टोन भी नहीं है
स्टोन नहीं है वो
ये दिस इज डायबिटिक किडनी
क्रिएटिनिन भी वो रहता ना क्या बोलते हैं उसे क्रिएटिनिन ब्लड में तभी ज्यादा होता है ना जब किडनी ढंग से काम नहीं करती
सो अभी 1.74 इज लाइक ओके हाई तो है नॉर्मल ह्यूमन के हिसाब से बट अकॉर्डिंग टू डायबिटिस किडनी इट्स ओके
हां
HbA1c अरे कम हो गया अरे 7.2 हो गया लास्ट टाइम 8 था
कम कि ज्यादा हो गया भाई ऊपर देख रेफरेंस रेंज तो कम दिखा रखी है ब्रो
अरे अच्छा इसमें ऐसा है क्या अरे एक्चुअली जब मैं ये हेल्थियन से लिया मैं केयर हॉस्पिटल से लिया तो उसमें नॉर्मल ह्यूमंस के लिए 11 to 13 नहीं
वो हीमोग्लोबिन पूरा हीमोग्लोबिन होगा वो ये ग्लाइकोसाइलेटेड ये कुछ और उसके अंदर कोई HbA1
अरे ये HbA1c है रे माने मैं इसको देख के हीमोग्लोबिन सोचा हाँ ये HbA1c 3 मंथ्स का ग्लूकोज है वो 11 वाला क्या
हाँ जो 11 to 13 बोल रहा है अबे रेफरेंसिंग ज्यादा होती है एक्चुअली इससे पता है मेरा ही 14 आया था जब मैं बहुत पतला था अभी तो मेरा 15-16 होगा 15 तो होगा एटलीस्ट मेरा हीमोग्लोबिन अभी करंटली
लिपिड प्रोफाइल ये पता नहीं ये सब भी तो एक्सप्लेन कर क्या क्या है
भाई पता नहीं ये मेरे को भी नहीं पता और मैं तो इसने बायोकेमिस्ट्री पढ़ रखी है इससे पूछ
ये क्या है लिपिड प्रोफाइल अच्छा कोलेस्ट्रॉल ये सब
कोलेस्ट्रॉल है तो कोलेस्ट्रॉल भाई, ये तो सब
मैं इसको
कोलेस्ट्रॉल है
देखता
ब्रो।
हूँ
लिपिड
बायोरेफरेंस
प्रोफाइल मतलब लाइक बॉडी फैट कह रहा हूँ, जो ब्लड में जो फैट्स होते हैं वो उन सब के बारे में।
तो ये सब सही है एक्चुअली। फिर लिवर फंक्शन 0.3 to 1. ये नॉर्मल है,
सब नॉर्मल है।
ये हाई है थोड़ा।
एक एल्बुमिन ग्लोबुलिन रेशियो ये कम है,
ये वाला
एल्बुमिन ज्यादा है, मतलब एल्बुमिन कम है मतलब ग्लोबुलिन ज्यादा है। ग्लोबुलिन ज्यादा तभी एल्बुमिन ग्लोबुलिन रेशियो कम हो गया ना।
लास्ट सेकंड
अब ये कैसे हो जाता है एक साथ?
అరే రే శామ్ ఇంత ముందు మ్యాచ్ ఏమైంది తెలుసారా?
थ्रो అయిందా?
త్రో కాదురా,
आयन थोड़ा कम है देख, 70 to 180 रहना।
11-1 అయిందిరా
11-1 ना। ओके ओके।
ఫస్ట్ హాఫ్ మేము డౌన్ 13-5 చేసినాం।
देख मैं बोला था ना यूरिन में ज्यादा।
లాస్ట్ రౌండ్ అయితే
అబ్బా
ఉంటే
అరే ఉండండిరా ఒక్క నిమిషం।
స్పైక్ తీసుకపోయింటే అయిపోతుండేరా లాస్ట్ రౌండ్.
అబ్బా రే మీరు ఆడండిరా ఇంకొకటి కొన్ని డౌట్లు క్లియర్ చేసుకుని వస్తా।
మీరే చెప్పారు కదరా స్పైక్ తీసుకోకండి, చచ్చిపోయిన
నేను ఎందుకు చెప్పినారా స్పైక్ తీసుకోకండి?
हाँ
और क्या कहता, स्ट्रीम हैज एंडेड, इससे भी ड्रैग कर दिया। यार ये क्या हो रहा है यार, मैं पढ़ नहीं पा रहा यार, क्या हो गया?
लोग मुझे ड्रैग कर रहे यार।
हाँ वो मैंने देखा।
हाँ
बता
क्या था?
कम ऑन BM क्या?
ब्रॉन्ज अकाउंट।
अच्छा अरे तुम दोनों खेल लो ना फिर।
ज्यादा वो प्रोटीन ये हो रहा है, लॉस
हाँ।
हो रहा है।
बिफोर यू स्टार्ट प्लेइंग देयर। ओके।
अरे मैं एक मेन अकाउंट में डेथ मैच खेल के आता हूँ, अगर अच्छा खेल रहा हो तो खेलता हूँ।
अरे तो कोई नहीं।
बिफोर अरे यार मुझे तो एक तो वैलोरेंट खेलने का इंटरेस्ट ही नहीं है, ऐसे ही खेल रहा हूँ। जब इंटरेस्ट आ रहा है स्मर्फ कर रहा हूँ, वो स्मर्फ कर बिना स्मर्फ करे मेन में खेला था अभी तक, असेंडेंट क्या इमॉर्टल भी हो सकता था मैं।
हाँ एसेंडेंट तो हाई एसेंडेंट कौन सा?
यूरिन का तो पता नहीं करके जा। ठीक है
बाकी सब तो ठीक ही है, तो मतलब एक तो किडनी फंक्शन है खराब थोड़ा सा, और हीमोग्लोबिन, दो ही चीज है ना। देखिए रहा है इसमें भी हीमोग्लोबिन दिखा रहा है, मीन कॉर्पस्कुलर हेमाटोक्रिट भी कम है, 45% होता है यूजुअली, 30% है जरा। और सेल हाँ ऑफ कोर्स हेमाटोक्रिट कम है, हेमाटोक्रिट होता है परसेंटेज ऑफ आरबीसी इन ब्लड, तो लाइक अगर हेमाटोक्रिट कम है तो ओवरऑल सब कुछ कम होगा। हाँ देख हो रहा ना वो हीमोग्लोबिन ये रहा, ये 10 है ना, रेफरेंस रेंज देख 13 to 17 होती है एवरेज मेल की ग्राम पर डेसीलीटर, तो इतनी होनी चाहिए, 10 है कम है।
डॉक्टर्स बोले कि लाइक माय डैड इज यूज्ड टू इट आफ्टर सर्जरी लाइक।
बट हाँ बट वो है कि क्लिनिकली नॉर्मल नहीं है ये। मैं तो पढ़ूंगा क्लियर, आई एम सॉरी रियली सॉरी। अब मैं ऐसा साउंड कर रहा हूँ, आई एम साउंडिंग लाइक अ नर्ड बट आई हैव टू। नहीं बस तो थोड़ी रहा हूँ जो गुड नाइट।
क्योंकि पता है इतने दिन
हाँ तो
टाइम पास हो गया,
तो लाइक हीमोग्लोबिन वाली से कोई दिक्कत नहीं आ रही डैड को तेरे को। बट उससे शॉर्ट लाइक ब्रेथनेस, शॉर्ट ब्रेथ वो हो जाती होगी।
तो नहीं उतना हेवी
शॉर्टनेस ऑफ ब्रेथ
कुछ भी
नहीं फिर भी लाइक स्टेयर्स क्लाइंब करते हुए ये सब करते हुए शॉर्टनेस ऑफ ब्रेथ नहीं होती है।
हाँ होता है हल्का सा, आज भी स्टेप्स क्लाइंब करके फर्स्ट फ्लोर आए तेरे सिर्फ मेरे डैडी विदाउट एनी हेल्प, भी उतना लाइक ही हैड पेन इन द नीज बस। राइट हाँ
ही इज स्टिल रिकवरिंग फ्रॉम दैट सर्जरी राइट।
ओ सर्जरी भाई रिकवर हो गया, ही कांट वॉक एज नॉर्मल, वॉकर के साथ ही वॉक करना पड़ेगा।
हाँ चलो बट लाइक जो फिजियोलॉजिकल लाइक अंदर का जो मामला है सब कुछ लाइक हाउ ही फील्स नाउ। हाँ वो दिखाया था मेरे को तूने, जो उनका पूरा नेक्रोसिस हो गया था ना ये शेड।
ना वो वाला नहीं, अभी लेटेस्ट। अरे डाउनलोड करना पड़ेगा क्या?
हाँ
फोटो डाउनलोड करके दिखाता हूँ।
हाँ लाइक मैंने ये वाले देखे थे लेकिन इसमें मेरे को याद नहीं कौन सा वाले की बात कर रहा था।
अरे डैडी का कहाँ है ये वाला ये?
राइट राइट, बाकी सब डाउनलोड हो रहा है आई गेस।
हाँ पता नहीं हो रहा है क्या पूरा।
कोई नहीं, फोन मेरे को सेंड कर दिया। अरे हो गया हो रहा है, धीरे धीरे हो रहा है, हो
हो
जाएंगे।
रहा है धीरे धीरे।
हाँ अच्छा, तो लाइक अभी क्या क्या, एक तो वो क्रिएट लाइक किडनी प्रॉब्लम है, तो किडनी प्रॉब्लम से अभी उनको क्या वॉशरूम वगैरह ज्यादा जाते हैं कुछ ऐसा?
वो होता है।
अच्छा, मेन सिम्टम क्या है लाइक अभी मेन?
क्लाउडी रहता है।
अच्छा, विजन क्लाउडी
मतलब
रहता
वैसे
है।
नहीं रे, विजन नहीं, यूरिन।
यूरिन क्लाउडी
मतलब
रहता है, राइट।
कुछ नहीं रे, पेन नहीं है या
हम्म
नॉर्मल यूरिन
तो वो तो
खांसी है,
रिकवर कर
सब
जाएंगे,
नॉर्मल।
एंटीबायोटिक्स वगैरह ज्यादा लिए तो उससे धीरे धीरे करके रिकवर हो जाएंगे।
उसके
बाकी ऐसा
लिए
कुछ
2
और कोई
टैबलेट
दिक्कत तो
दिए।
नहीं आती प्रॉपर लाइक ऐसा
हाँ
डेली लाइफ में?
नहीं।
हाँ तो धीरे धीरे रिकवर हो ही जाएंगे। वो सर्जरी से भाई रिकवर होने में टाइम लगता है, इट्स नॉट नेचुरल थिंग, राइट? दैट्स व्हाई
यस।
बॉडी पे भाई इतना वो पड़ता है, स्ट्रेस पड़ता है।
फोटोज डाउनलोड हुआ, सिर्फ ये डाउनलोड नहीं हुआ।
तो दूसरे पे स्विच कर रही हो जाएगा तो?
हाँ ये वाला।
हाँ राइट,
ये
अच्छा
राइट
अच्छा।
लेग देख रहे हो, पूरा बेंड नहीं होता है।
ओके, पूरा बैंड नहीं होता?
हाँ बेंड नहीं होता।
अच्छा, उठा के रखना पड़ता है ना ऐसे टिल्ट
हाँ,
करके?
उठा के। मतलब हाँ देख, अभी नीचे स्टेप लेने के लिए ट्राई कर रहे हैं ना।
राइट हाँ ओके ओके ओके। सो उनका पूरा हिप फ्लेक्स नहीं हो रहा है?
हाँ
वो तो पूरा पीछे जो लाइक, मैं समझ गया। मैं
नी बेंड नहीं हो रहा, सिर्फ
नी बेंड नहीं हो रहा, ओके, इसलिए पूरा नी बेंड किस लिए नहीं हो रहा कि दर्द है?
हो गया वहाँ, दर्द है, मसल लॉस है, टिश्यू लॉस है।
टिश्यू लॉस है तो ऐसा स्ट्रेची फील होता है, खिंचता होगा पूरा टिश्यू?
स्ट्रेची नहीं, पूरा हार्ड रॉक फील होता है।
अच्छा तो पीछे वाला पूरा स्टिफ हो गया होगा, हैमस्ट्रिंग, जहाँ हैमस्ट्रिंग होती है उधर साइड
पूरा स्टिफ हो गया, अभी थोड़ा लूज हो रहा है।
उसके लिए फिजियोथेरेपी वगैरह प्रॉपर करानी पड़ेगी, पता है? रिहैब इस बहुत टफ होता है ऐसी सर्जरीज का।
बट मनीष, जो एंकल का वो जो टिश्यू है, लिगामेंट जो भी कुछ वो पुल करता है ना पीछे से, मुझे
टेंडन्स होता है,
टेंडेंस है। हाँ वो पूरा लाइक निकाल दिए तो
अच्छा,
एंकल इज लाइक लूज।
ओके सो एंकल का टेंडन पूरा वो डैमेज हो गया था क्या? एंकल तक पहुंच गया था?
अरे एंकल क्या, हिप तक पहुंच गया। और
नहीं हिप तक तो मेरे को पता था, बट एंकल तक मेरे को लगा सिर्फ हिप से ही।
नीचे से स्टार्ट हुआ।
अच्छा, स्टार्ट नीचे से हुआ, ओके।
नीचे से हुआ नहीं, नीचे मतलब
काफ से, आई गॉट इट, काफ से, राइट। अच्छा तो फिर लाइक टेंडन निकाल दिया पीछे का, कौन सा टेंडन बोलते हैं, मैं नाम भी भूल गया उसका। हाँ तो वो फ्लेक्स, वो प्लांटर फ्लेक्शन के लिए काम आता है, लाइक प्लांटर फ्लेक्शन के लिए काम आता है वो टेंडन।
मम्मी लागाने ఉన్నారా నువ్వు?
नाइस। तो ऐसे बैठने में दिक्कत नहीं होती? बैठने में लेग स्ट्रेट करनी पड़ती होगी?
मैं लाइक ओके हाँ, मतलब थोड़ा देख, दो चेयर्स लगा हुआ है, नीचे कुशन है।
లేకపోతే
प्रोटेस्टेंट।
ओके,
అంటే మీరు ఎవరిని కొలుస్తారు? జీసస్ నా వాళ్ళ మదర్ నా?
जीसस।
अच्छा तो
कैथोलिक्स वाला मदर ని కొలుస్తారు కదా?
तो अभी लाइक अंकल पैर को हिला पाते हैं अपने कि नहीं, पूरा ऊपर नीचे ऐसा?
हाँ हिला पाता है, बट
उतना अच्छे से नहीं हिला पाते।
नॉट फास्ट।
राइट
तेरे जैसा हिला पाते मन।
हाँ तो वो आई थिंक वो टेंडन लाइक कंप्लीटली रिमूव कर दिया, सो जैसे नहीं हो रहा होगा।
माय डैड माय हीरो।
सोली पीछे हमारी जो काफ में मसल्स होती है, एक सोलिस होती है और एक और होती है जो 2 हेड वाली होती है, उसका नाम भूल गया मैं। हाँ तो वो हमारे
हाउस वार्मिंग
यस, हाउस वार्मिंग।
అందరూ ఒకలా ఉంటే ఫ్యాన్ ఒక్కడు ఉంటాడు పెద్దగా।
सबके सामने कैसे आड़ू मैं इजीली आइडेंटिफाई। कहां गया वो?
అందుకే ప్రేరణ నిన్నే అందరూ వచ్చి జతిన్ గారు ప్రేరణ ఈజీలీ ఐडेंटिफाइबल। क्या मेरे साथ ऑल रही के भी फर्स्ट बेंच में बैठता प्रेरणा के साथ।
सही, चल कोई नहीं, हो जाएंगे रिकवर, मतलब इतना कोई नहीं है। बट वो ओल्ड एज है तो भाई रिकवरी में टाइम लगता ही है भाई। नॉर्मल अगर चोट लगेगी, ये जिस चीज से तू और मैं 1 हफ्ते में रिकवर कर लेंगे, उसको ही 1 महीना लगेगा।
अरे ब्रोंजाइटिस से आ जा रहे।
चल ठीक है सैम, you guys play, right? I will go study.
Instagram లో వీడియో కాల్ చేసుకుంటే WhatsApp లో మాట్లాడతారులే.
Only studies bro, we talk about studies, nothing
bro.
ओ बाबा
अरे what the
लव सिंबल। ओ
shit ये थोड़ा अरे मैं एक मेन अकाउंट से वो खेल के आता हूँ डेथ मैच
मैं वाह
1 DM मैं अभी तक आज नहीं खेला ना
चलो चलो गाइस बाय बाय
ओके ब्रो मनीष ऑल द बेस्ट स्टडी वेल
ठीक है हाँ थैंक्स बाय Oh man. That's what? 30 minutes? Holy shit. Fuck. First session is gone. Completely wiped off. But
From
कोई नहीं.
these nerves that you see here, high
Okay, concentrate now. Focus, focus.
muscles are border of a rib, and then run ventrocaudally to the upper border of the rib below. Eventually, these muscles are bordered by the external thoracic fascia.
External
The
thoracic
innervation
fascia.
of the external intercostal muscles come from these nerves that you see here highlighted in green, which are the intercostal nerves.
Intercostal nerves. First to 11.
Rise from the thoracic nerves T1 to T11. The next group of muscles that we're going to be talking about that you see here
Arise from thoracic nerve. Okay, I have to get some water, man.
मनीष भाई मनीष भाई मनीष कांडू
here highlighted in green are known as the internal intercostal muscle. About that you see here highlighted in green are known as the internal intercostal muscles. As for their origin points, these muscles originate from the upper border of a rib, and then they go to insert ventrocranially at the low of a rib. For their origin points, these muscles originate from the upper border.
बोल के नहीं रहा साले शर्मा रहा है
बोल मतलब तू आके कुछ बोला ही नहीं
मैं तब से हेलो हेलो बोल रहा हूँ तो सुने
भोसले के नहीं बोला आवाज ही नहीं आई तेरी गांडू
सही कर ले
नहीं अरे स्ट्रीमर मोड में वो आवाज नहीं आती ना आने की
ऐसा है क्या
हाँ
तो जो मैं हेलो हेलो बोल रहा था तभी
शायद हो सकता है स्टार्टिंग के जो स्पैम करते हैं नूबड़े आके तेरी तरह उसको भी शायद म्यूट कर देता हो
मातर
वो उसके के वैलोरेंट का खेल रहा है मैं तो अभी पढ़ रहा हूँ भाई स्ट्रीम देख ले भाई मेरी प्रोफेशनल स्ट्रीमर की स्ट्रीम देख ले 2-3-4 बजे तक सोच रहा हूँ 3 तक तो पढ़ूंगा एटलीस्ट
अच्छा
तू इतने लगा ले मरवा ले कुछ भी कर ले भाई, मैं तो तभी खेलूंगा। इतने तू हारता रहे, मेरे मेरे डायमंड टू आ जाओ मेरी तरह वापस। फिर साथ में रैंक अप करेंगे, ठीक है?
Of a rib. And then they go to insert ventrocranially at the lower border of the rib above. They
Ventrocl what the fuck he's talking about?
originate
Yeah, okay, ventrocranially, got it.
cranially at the lower border of the rib above. The internal intercostal muscles are going to be innervated by the intercostal nerves, same thing that we saw previously, which arise from the thoracic nerves T1 to T11. As for the different functions associated to these muscles, the task of the intercostal muscles is to then tense the intercostal spaces during deep inspiration. They also support the breathing mechanism.
I can see you over here. I can see you Manish की बोल में. Flaring भी stream कर रहा है आज तो.
क्या?
Flaring stream कर रहा है आज.
फ्लेयरिंग मतलब?
तू नहीं जानता का?
क्या बोल रहा है?
लीड का पुराना प्लेयर है.
अच्छा, नहीं पता मेरे को,
सिंगापुर की टीम.
नहीं पता। सुना होगा मैंने लेकिन मेरे को याद नहीं।
Keep in mind that the contraction of the external intercostal muscles will cause elevation of the ribs, whereas the internal intercostal muscles will be lowering the ribs. So they're also known as expiratory breathing muscles. Moving on to the next muscle that you see, or next set of muscles that you see here, highlighted in green, the transversus thoracis. This muscle is thin muscle on the inner surface of the anterior thoracic wall. As for its origin points, it lies on the dorsal surface of the xiphoid process. Which you can also see here on the image, the xiphoid process. And the body of the sternum, as you can see here, is going to serve as an origin point for...
Wait. Originate from xiphoid process and body of sternum. Okay, alright. यार आज कंसंट्रेशन सा नहीं हो रहा। स्टार्ट की थी मैंने स्ट्रीम, मैंने पढ़ना चालू किया यार, फिर उधर वो थोड़ा बिजी हो गया, वो सैम बात करने लग गया मेरे से, फिर थोड़ा टाइम वेस्ट हो गया, थोड़ा सा 20-25 मिनट, फिर मेरा कंसंट्रेशन चला गया। वापस कंसंट्रेशन बनाना पड़ेगा।
This muscle as well. Now from there are 5 insertion tendons which run craniolaterally to the cartilages of ribs 2 to 6, giving it a serrated appearance, as you can see on the image. Now the
Cartilage of ribs 2nd and 6th. 2nd to 6th. क्या हुआ?
exact number
क्या हो गया? हाँ?
मैं स्ट्रीम देख रहा हूँ ना, बहुत गंदा मारा है लेयरिंग को, चिपका के दिया है।
Number of tendons and the places of insertion vary greatly, making the transversus thoracis one of the most variable muscles in your body. Caudally, its fibers course almost parallel to those of the transversus abdominis, which is where it got its name from. In rare cases, these two muscles can even be found merged together. Now, the innervation is a caudally, its fibers serrated appearance, cartilages of ribs 2 to 6, giving it a serrated appearance, as you can see on the image. Now, the exact number of tendons and the places of insertion vary greatly, making the transversus thoracis one of the most variable muscles in your body. Caudally, its fibers course almost parallel to those of the transversus abdominis, which is where it got its name from. In rare cases, these two muscles can even be found merged together. Now, the innervation of the transversus thoracis will come from these nerves that you see here highlighted in green. You probably have guessed, you've seen several times throughout this tutorial.
Intercostal nerves.
These are the intercostal nerves, specifically 2 to 6. So the intercostal nerves arising from the thoracic nerves T2 to T6. Now the next topic will be the functions associated to the transversus thoracis. The contraction of this muscle will be pulling the ribs cartilages caudally and
rib cartilages caudally.
that way supporting expiration when you breathe out. However, it is not considered to be among the primary respiratory muscles such as the intercostal muscles or even the diaphragm, because many people have a poorly developed transversus thoracis and show no breathing difficulties. For those reasons, it is only regarded as an accessory muscle of expiration. Next muscles in line that we're going to see here also a collection of muscles known as the subcostal muscles. As you can see here, they're also connecting the ribs, and they will be originating from the inner surface of one rib, and then they are inserted into the inner surface of the second or third rib below near its angle. To be more specific, the angle of the rib. Now, the innervation of the subcostal muscles is carried out by the lower intercostal nerves. As for the different functions by the lower intercostal nerves. As for
Huh?
the different functions associated to these muscles, the subcostal muscles have a similar function to that of the internal intercostal muscles, and they
Lochi, boy.
a similar function to that of the internal intercostal muscles, and they depress the ribs, which makes them accessory muscles of expiration.
Wait. Acha, wait.
The different functions associated to these muscles. The subcostal muscles have a similar function to that of the internal intercostal muscles, and they depress the ribs, which makes them accessory muscles of expiration. Moving on to intercostal muscles. The muscles that we're going to be talking about that you see previously, as for the different functions associated to these muscles, the task of the intercostal muscles is to then tense the intercostal spaces during deep inspiration. They also support the breathing mechanism. Keep in mind that the contraction of the external intercostal muscles will cause elevation of the ribs, whereas the internal intercostal muscles will be lower of the ribs, whereas the internal intercostal muscles will be lowering the ribs. So they're also known as expiratory breathing muscles. Moving on to the next muscle that you see, or next set of muscles that you see here. Insert third rib angle of the rib. Now the innervation of the subcostal. As for the similar function to that of the internal intercostal muscles, they depress the ribs, which makes them accessory muscles of expiration. Moving on to the next muscle on our list that you see here highlighted in green, one on each
serratus
side,
anterior,
which is known as the serratus anterior. The serratus anterior is a fan-shaped muscle at the lateral wall of your thorax. It is originating from the ribs, specifically rib 1 to 9. And as for the insertion points, the muscle will be inserting at the ventral surface of the medial border of the scapula.
Middle border of the scapula.
To 9. And as for the insertion points, the muscle will be inserting at the ventral surface of the medial border of the scapula. And due to its course, as you can see here, the muscle has a serrated appearance. Now the serratus anterior can be divided into different parts. The superior part, which goes from the first to second ribs, and then all the way to the superior angle of the scapula. There is also an intermediate part which runs from the second to the the third ribs, and will go all the way to the medial border of the scapula. Another part, which is known as the inferior part, which runs from the 4th to 9th ribs, and then goes to insert on the medial border and also the inferior angle of the scapula. Now keep in mind that on the previous slide I was mentioning that the insertion point for this muscle
medial border of
is
scapula,
the medial border of
ventral
the scapula.
part.
But I also mentioned here the superior angle of the scapula and the inferior angle of the scapula as insertion points for the superior and inferior parts, which is important to highlight here. So you can also mention for more detail that the superior and inferior angles of the scapula serve as insertion points for the superior and inferior parts respectively. Moving on to the innervation of the serratus anterior, the muscle is going to be innervated by this nerve that you see here highlighted.
Long thoracic C5 to C7.
The long thoracic nerve, which you see here on this image. This is an anterior view of the shoulder, where you see then the humerus, the scapula, and the long thoracic nerve, which, as you can also see here, is a branch of this plexus here, the very famous brachial plexus.
Brachial plexus, okay.
Talk about the different functions associated to the serratus anterior. Now, the contraction of the entire serratus anterior leads to ventrolateral movement of the scapula. Along the ribs. Due to this pull, the inferior part at the lower scapula, the shoulder joint, is then shifted superiorly. And this shift will now enable you to lift your arm up to 90 degrees, which is then elevation. In contrast, the superior part will be depressing the scapula and thus acts antagonistically. Another function of this muscle is to then stabilize the scapula within the shoulder. And finally, with a fixed scapula, the muscle lifts the ribs, is able to act as an accessory muscle of inspiration. we're going to move on and talk about one of the major muscles that define.
हाँ
स्ट्रीम
हाँ कर रहा हूँ
मैं करने लगा।
तो खेल रहा है क्या?
खेलूंगा ना अभी।
खेल ले कर ले कर ले।
चेक्स कराया मैंने किससे उसने तूने।
आया मैं 1 मिनट वॉशरूम गया और पानी पी के आया यार। कम हुआ थोड़ा सा, क्या सेरेटस इंटीरियर पढ़ा और हाँ और इंटरकोस्टल मसल एक्सटर्नल और इंटरनल और एक सबकोस्टल था ना वो, सबकोस्टल मसल्स।
कितना पड़ेगा ये बता।
हाँ सबकोस्टल नहीं पड़ता, ट्रांसफर सिस्टर
ये
एसिस।
बता कितना
दो
पड़ेगा।
दो और मतलब 2 घंटे और, मतलब 2 गेम्स लगा ले तू आराम से। हाँ हाँ 3 बजा दूंगा। बजाने पड़ेंगे भाई, पढ़ना तो है ही। 3 नहीं हो जाऊंगा तो मेरे 12 बज जाएंगे भाई वहां जाके, देख रहा तू।
कब जाना है तूने?
परसों। आया मैं वॉशरूम का आया।
मनीष भाई, ओ मनीष भाई,
हमारे साथ हाँ साले
मनीष
झूठ बोल रहा है ये लड़का, उसने खुद मराई है, अभी बता रहा था मेरे को।
कब बताया मैंने तो कभी बताया नहीं।
बताया भाई, तूने फोन करके बताया था मेरे को, तूने अपना स्क्रीनशॉट भी भेजा था गांड का।
तूने बैठ के क्या किया, खुद आया उसको देख?
हाँ नहीं भाई जी, भाई उल्टी आ गई थी मेरे को तो, फिर बड़ी मुश्किल से रोकी।
समझ गया भाई, इतने हिलाया होगा पक्का।
चल भाई, ऐसे लाता नहीं भाई मैं, समझ रहा है?
थोड़ी बहुत फुल हिलता ही नहीं।
क्यों? पत्थर का बना थोड़ी है वो।
तो तुझे पता क्यों नहीं हिलता तेरा?
क्या क्यों नहीं हिलता? गेस करिए रीजन।
तुझे पता होगा भाई, मेरा तो हिलता है।
हिलता है क्या?
हाँ ना भाई।
पक्की बात
आया
है?
मैं, एक सेकंड आया मैं।
जल्दी आ।
हमारे साथ श्री रघुनाथ तो किस बात की चिंता, हमारे साथ श्री रघुनाथ तो किस बात की चिंता, शरण में रख दिया जब माथ तो किस बात की चिंता, शरण में रख दिया जब माथ तो किस बात की चिंता। किया करते हो तुम दिन रात क्यों बिन बात की चिंता, किया करते हो तुम दिन रात क्यों बिन बात की चिंता, किया करते हो तुम दिन रात क्यों बिन बात की चिंता, किया करते हो तुम दिन रात क्यों बिन बात की चिंता। तेरे स्वामी तेरे स्वामी को रहती है तेरे हर बात की चिंता, तेरे स्वामी को रहती है तेरे हर बात की चिंता, हमारे साथ श्री रघुनाथ तो किस बात की
तेरे तारे
साथ श्री रघुनाथ तो किस बात
चल रही, जिसका चल रही, जिसका चल रही, बांके
न
चल रही।
खाने की न पीने की
मैंने भाई
न
क्या गाना
मरने
लगा
की
दिया
न
था।
जीने की न
हाँ।
मरने की।
क्या?
अपनी वो बाइसेप करने वाली वो नहीं थी,
हाँ।
जो वीडियो सी डाली थी ना,
हम्म।
उसने क्या गाना लगा दिया।
क्या लगा था? वो रैप
पहाड़ी
रैप
रैप
लगाई
था
थी
वो,
ना?
पहाड़ी रैप था वो।
डॉक्यूमेंट तो देखा ही नहीं भाई।
ठीक है यार मनीष भाई, ऐसा क्या।
अब तो अच्छा यार,
एरिक रैप्रिट, एरिक रैप्रिट।
ये वाला।
हम्म। ए,
ऐसी लग रही है भाई, नॉर्मल हिंदी जैसा ही लग रहा है।
हाँ मतलब पहाड़ी बंदा है ना ये।
हम्म।
उसने गाने में यूज भी तो पहाड़ी वो किया है ना, कि शिमला की बंदी।
अच्छा अच्छा अच्छा, अरे तो कोई नहीं, सेम
है
ऐसा
ना,
ही है, कुछ ऐसा कुछ वो नहीं है।
मतलब रोमांटिक गाना लगा दिया।
कोई नहीं भाई, मैं भी लगाता रहता हूँ वैसे तो भाई, मैंने भी लगाया था एक बार, देखी वाला
मेरे
लगाया
को
था।
बाद में लगा यार, मैंने 5 किलो का तो मार रहा हूँ मैं। पर फिर मैं सोचता हूँ कि भाई मैं वेट शो ऑफ करने के लिए थोड़ी। अच्छा सुन मनीष, मेरे को ना एक बंदे ने बोला, सुन तो,
हाँ।
ओए चूतिया,
बोलना।
बंद कर, मेरे कान में आ रहा बज रहा है जोर जोर से।
बोलना।
मेरे को ना एक बंदे ने बोला कि ना तेरे ना गर्दन पे बहुत ज्यादा मांस आ रहा है, ऐसा लग रहा है, मतलब गर्दन बड़ी हो रही है जैसे तेरी, ऐसा फील हो रहा है।
कोई बात नहीं तो भाई, सही है, गर्दन पे होना चाहिए ब्रो। थिक थिक नेक इज वेरी गुड सेल्फ डिफेंस के लिए, है ना? एक्चुअली स्ट्रॉन्ग स्ट्रॉन्ग नेक होनी चाहिए, अच्छी चीज है। इधर भी ऐसा नहीं, डोंट गो आफ्टर अ थिन नेक और समथिंग, यू आर नॉट अ गर्ल ब्रो। थिक नेक इज अट्रैक्टिव।
अबे गंदा लग रहा है देखने में।
गंदा नहीं होता ब्रो, थिक नेक इज अट्रैक्टिव ब्रो। वो तो तू
मेरे को तो
जब,
बहुत गंदा लगता है।
नहीं ब्रो, थिक नेक अच्छी होती है। लाइक थिकनेस ऑफ नेक ऐसा, लाइक प्रॉपर फिटनेस इंडस्ट्री या फिर ये जितने होते हैं कॉम्बैट स्पोर्ट्स में, नेक थिकनेस की वैल्यू आर्म साइज जैसी होती है, जैसे कि भाई आर्म कितने की है तेरे, 16-17 की, ऐसे नेक भी नापते हैं लोग। तो नेक, हैविंग अ बिग नेक इज गुड, इट्स नॉट बैड। डोंट लिसन टू द पीपल हु टेल यू अदरवाइज ब्रदर, आई एम टेलिंग यू द ट्रुथ। मेरी गर्दन तो भाई पतली है, मेरे को बुरी लगती है। आई मीन जब मैं मोटा हो जाता हूँ तो मेरी मोटी हो जाती है गर्दन, बट ठीक ठीक है, एवरेज है। मेरी ना मसल्स ऐसी हैं, लाइक ट्रंक की
एक मिनट,
टुवर्ड्स मेरी मसल्स थिक है।
स्टीम
फिर
स्टीम 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 स्टार्ट करने दे, फिर बोलियो ठीक है।
हाँ
नहीं तो पहले बोल ले, फिर बाद में स्टीम स्टार्ट
हाँ
करेंगे।
हाँ, तो मेरी लाइक जो मेरी पर्सनल मेरे को मसल इंसर्शंस लगते हैं ना, वो ऐसे है कि लाइक टुवर्ड्स द ट्रंक मेरे जितने भी मसल्स हैं वो थिक है। लाइक फॉर अवे जैसे जाते हैं तो वो टेपर होते चले जाते हैं। फॉर एग्जांपल मेरी बाइसेप और ट्राइसेप है, तो टुवर्ड्स द शोल्डर, मतलब शोल्डर की तरफ जो है मसल मास मेरा बहुत ज़्यादा है, फिर जैसे एल्बो की तरफ जाता है तो कम हो जाता है काफ़ी। तो ऐसा है मेरी बॉडी में, टेपर हो जाती हैं मसल्स मेरी, ऐसी है।
चल मैं स्ट्रीम लगा स्टार्ट करूं, ठीक है?
ठीक है, ठीक है।
भगवान के प्रिय नाम की चिंता रहे। बाबू मेरे को माफ कर दो, मैं तुम्हारे बिना नहीं रह सकता बाबू। अबे साली, तू मुझे क्या छोड़ के गई? तूने सोचा मैं तेरे बिना मर जाऊंगा? चल निकल।
क्या है ये? क्या करते हो तुम बिन चिंता?
श्वास में भगवान के प्रिय नाम की चिंता हमारे साथ श्री रघुनाथ तो इस बात की चिंता हमारे साथ श्री रघुनाथ तो इस बात की चिंता विभीषण को अभय वर दे दिया लंकेश पल भर में विभीषण को अभय वर दे दिया लंकेश पल भर में विभीषण को अभय वर दे दिया लंकेश पल भर में विभीषण को अभय वर दे दिया लंकेश पल भर में उन्हीं कहा उन्हीं कहा उन्हीं कहा उन्हीं कहा उन्हीं का कर रहे गुणगान तो किस बात
की चिंता।
फिनिश माइक बंद कर दे भाई प्लीज, थैंक यू।
ओके ओके।
हमारे साथ श्री रघुनाथ तो
अगर बोलना हो ना, असल में कुछ बोलना हो मेरे से, तब दिल की बातें करनी, तब बात करें।
हाँ हाँ, तू भी म्यूट कर लियो फिर, मैं स्टार्ट कर रहा हूँ ना अभी।
हाँ
हुई बिरजेश पर कृपा बनाया दास प्रभु अपना हुई बिरजेश पर कृपा बनाया दास प्रभु अपना हुई बिरजेश पर कृपा बनाया दास प्रभु अपना बिरजेश पर कृपा बनाया दास प्रभु अपना उन्हीं के हाथ में अब हाथ तो किस बात की चिंता उन्हीं के हाथ में अब हाथ तो किस बात की चिंता हमारे साथ श्री रघुनाथ तो किस बात की चिंता हमारे साथ श्री रघुनाथ तो किस बात की
अबे
Antagonistically. Another function of this muscle is to then stabilize. I'm going to talk about one of the major muscles that defines your chest. This is the pectoralis major. Definitely shapes the surface anatomy of the chest and participates in forming the interior wall of the axilla. It has a broad origin point, so it goes from the medial part of the clavicle. Also, the sternum serves as an origin point. And this is a bit of also the sternum serves as a origin point. And this is a bit of variable information, but most sources indicate the costal cartilages from 2nd to 6th. The interior layer of the rectus sheet will be serving as an origin point as well.
Anterior layer of rectus sheath. Resilient fibrous compartment that contains both rectus abdominis muscle and the pyramidalis muscle. Yeah, that's the lully muscle I was talking about. All right, all right.
For the pectoralis major. When it comes to the insertion point for the pectoralis major, this is an easier one. The muscle is going to then, or all the fibers of this muscle will insert together at the crest of the greater tubercle, as you can see here. So this is the greater tubercle. Of the humerus, and their crest is found just
clavicle origin, clavicle, sternum, and costal cartilage of 2nd to 6th rib, and anterior sheath of anterior rectus sheath. हमारे साथ श्री रघुनाथ तो किस बात की
just below it, and will be serving as an insertion point for the pectoralis major. The innervation of the pectoralis major will be provided by two nerves. The medial pectoral nerve, which you see here
medial pectoral nerve
highlighted in green, and the lateral pectoral nerve.
Medial pectoral nerve and lateral pectoral nerve. Medial pectoral nerve, lateral pectoral nerve, pectoral nerve. Oh man. Let's go.
Moving on to the different functions associated to the pectoralis major. This is the most important muscle for adduction and anteversion of the shoulder joint, which you see.
Adduction. Anteversion. Wait, how? What? Yeah, adduction. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I'm a fucking noob, man. Anteversion. What's anteversion? I forgot, man.
Indicated by this arrow. Adduction, when you bring your arm closer to your torso. And also anteversion, which in the case of the arm is also known as flexion. So therefore flexing the arm forward at the shoulder joint. It is also involved in internal rotation, which you see here indicated by this arrow. So if the arms are fixed, the muscle is also able to lift the trunk, which can be helpful in climbing or during inspiration.
Internal rotation. How? Oh, yeah. Oh. But, like, if... What? It's all... I'm so confused now.
The next muscle is a smaller one with a very similar name. the pectoralis minor. The pectoralis minor is located under the patient, able to lift the trunk by this. It is also involved in internal rotation, which you see here indicated by this arrow. So if the arms are fixed, the muscle is also able to lift the trunk, which can be helpful in climbing or during inspiration. The next muscle is a smaller one with a very similar name, the pectoralis minor. The pectoralis minor is located under the pectoralis major, and both form the anterior wall of the axilla. The contracted muscle can be easily felt or palpated there. The pectoralis major and both form the anterior wall of the axilla. The contracted muscle can be easily felt or palpated there. The pectoralis minor is going to be originating from 3 ribs specifically. So from rib 3 all the way to the 5th rib. And then it inserts
acromion.
on
Sorry, coracoid process.
the coracoid process.
What the fuck, man? I'm so confused.
The scapula, as you can see here, this projection of the scapula. And as its big brother, the pectoralis minor is going to be innervated by 2 nerves. The
medial pectoral nerve,
which you see here highlighted in
lateral
green,
pectoral nerve,
and the lateral pectoral nerves.
Lateral pectoral nerve.
As for the different functions associated to the pectoralis minor, this muscle is able to pull the scapula anteriorly and inferiorly toward
Pectoralis minor. Pectoralis minor.
the ribs to pull the scapula anteriorly and inferiorly towards the ribs to what we call
हाँ anterior inferior हाँ बोल हाँ अबे हाँ 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 हाँ
हाँ मेरी स्ट्रीम देखेगा तूने?
रुक देख रहा हूँ 1 मिनट।
मैं बताया आवाज सही आ रही है, मैंने माइक की थोड़ी सेटिंग चेंज करी हुई है।
वे क्या करते हो तुम बिना
जिया तू बिहार के लाला,
1 मिनट
जिया तू हजार
रुक तेरे को डिस्कॉर्ड में म्यूट कर रहा हूँ। डिस्कॉर्ड में म्यूट कर अपने आप को।
जिया तर 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 तर
रुक तेरे को डिस्कॉर्ड में म्यूट कर रहा हूँ। डिस्कॉर्ड में म्यूट कर अपने आप।
कौन सा गाना है? जिया तू हजार तर 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 तर। अभी ये कौन सा गाना है? जिया तू हजार गाना सुन
बोल कुछ।
आर के लाला। अबे तो टीसी भाई
बोल कुछ।
हेलो बोल ही रहा हूँ।
ठीक है लाइक हल्की सी कम लाउड है, थोड़ी सी लाउड कर दे।
मैं तो तेरे पीछे
डिस्कॉर्ड की ज्यादा आ रही है, मेरी ज्यादा आ रही है पता है तेरे से, थोड़ी सी से लाउड कर दे इफ यू कैन, बाकी परफेक्ट है।
कहाँ से बढ़ा सकता हूँ मैं माइक?
कम है वे, बहुत कम है एक्चुअली, थोड़ी सी बढ़ा।
कुछ आइडिया है क्या?
इनपुट सेंसिटिविटी वगैरह देख ले, या फिर तेरा वो क्या कहते हैं उसमें होती है ड्राइवर्स में, माइक के ड्राइवर्स में जाके बढ़ा दे। बट तेरी डिस्कॉर्ड में तो सही आ रही है, स्ट्रीम में कम कैसे आ रही है? ओबीएस में देख ले माइक सेंसिटिविटी वगैरह का ऑप्शन हो क्या?
एक सेकंड रुक।
वो है जिया हो बिहार के लाल, तू गाना पूछ रहा था ना, वो गैंग्स ऑफ वासेपुर में है। अबे तेरे इसमें लेटेंसी भी बहुत देर बाद आई.
Random noise it will pick up. However, people have a tendency.
अब तू अभी पढ़ रहा था थोड़ी देर पहले, कुछ देख के स्क्रीन में बहुत कम आवाज आ रही थी, ऐसा आ रहा था जैसे तू विस्पर कर रहा हो. कम है थोड़ा, अभी कम है. डिस्कॉर्ड में अनम्यूट कर ले अपने आप को आप.
And depression of the scapula.
Function depression of scapula. Wait, what?
Minor. This muscle is able to pull the scapula anteriorly and inferiorly towards the ribs to what we call then depression of the scapula. This movement is both helpful when retracting the elevated arm as well as moving the arm posteriorly behind the back. It's also involved in elevation of the third to fifth ribs given a fixed scapula, and it expands fifth rib back. It's also involved in elevation of the third to fifth ribs given a fixed scapula, and it expands the rib cage. By those means, it can also serve as an accessory muscle during respiration. Next muscle that we're going to talk about, a very small muscle that you see here.
Subclavian muscle.
It's known as the
subclavius muscle.
It's also known as a muscle, a short muscle of the shoulder girdle. It's going to be originating, as you can see on the image, from the first rib. So this is the first rib and will serve as an origin point for the
origin, first rib. Yeah.
muscle, just on the border between the bone and the cartilage. As for the insertion point of the subclavius, you can see on the image from the first rib. So this is the first rib and will serve as an origin point for the muscle, just on the border between the bone and the cartilage. As for the insertion point of the subclavius, it inserts at the lower surface of the lateral clavicle. As you can see here, this is the clavicle. Thereby, it lies behind the pectoralis major. The brachial plexus and both is behind the pectoralis major. The brachial plexus and both the subclavian artery and vein pass under the subclavius muscle. And due to its location and relatively small size, it is really hard to palpate this muscle. As for the innervation associated to the subclavius muscle, we're looking now at the brachial plexus here. You see this nerve here highlighted in green, which is as named after the muscle, the subclavian nerve.
गांडूस
हाँ बोल ना।
तो गांडू है क्या? तू सुन
अबे
तो ले।
बोल ना जल्दी यार, मैं पढ़
अभी
रहा था।
देखिए अभी बात सही आ रही है क्या? अरे पढ़ाकू, अभी बात सही है क्या?
रुक अब म्यूट कर डिस्कॉर्ड में।
आ रही है क्या? अरे पढ़ाकू, अभी बात सही है क्या?
हाँ सही आ रही है, अब ठीक है, लाउड इनफ। बोल कुछ।
आप बताइए। बोल अब, बोल अब, बोल अब 1 2 3 के बाद 1 2 3, अब इसके बाद XYZ। तने नाची गाई सबके मन बहलावा रे भैया।
हाँ सही है अभी।
सेक्सी है।
अच्छा ठीक है अभी।
ठीक मतलब साले सेक्सी है।
ठीक है मतलब पहले से इम्प्रूव्ड है, अच्छी है। अब लाउड इनफ है, नॉर्मल है। पहले बहुत कम लाउड थी।
और लाउड करूं क्या? ये बोलने का मतलब है तेरा?
नहीं, इनफ है।
मेरा डिस्कॉर्ड म्यूटेड है ना?
नहीं अनम्यूटेड है, जब ही तो बात कर रहा हूँ तेरी स्ट्रीम बंद कर दी मैंने, अपना वो खोल लिया वापस से पढ़ाई का। सही आ रही है, कंटिन्यू। हे राम। अरे भाई चलो।
which is then a branch of the brachial plexus. Just for clarification, on this image, you're seeing the brachial plexus as well as the cervical plexus. We're going to talk about the different functions associated to the subclavius. The main task of the subclavius is the active stabilization of the clavicle and the sternoclavicular joint during the movements of the shoulder and arm. And in addition, its contraction leads to depression of the clavicle and elevation of the first rib, respectively. And these movements however, play a rather subordinate role. Last muscle on our list that you see here highlighted in green, this is known as the cremaster. The cremaster is formed by fibers from the abdominal musculature and covers the spermatic cord and testes.
What covers the spermatic cord and
Now the
testes?
original musculature and stir. The cremaster is formed by fibers from the abdominal musculature and covers the spermatic cord and testes. Now the origin point can be known as the inguinal ligament. And as for the insertion point of this muscle, this is a bit more complicated, but it forms a thin insertion point of as the inguinal ligament. And as for the insertion point of this muscle, this is a bit more complicated, but it forms a thin network of muscle fascicles around the spermatic cord and testes, or around the distal portion of the round ligament of uterus in women. When it comes to the innervation of the cremaster muscle, this muscle is innervated by the genital branch of the genitofemoral nerve. Now when it comes to the different functions associated to the cremaster contraction of this muscle is initiated by several stimuli. It lifts the testicles towards the torso, known as the cremaster reflex. This mechanism adjusts the temperature of the testicles for an adequate sperm production. One point that the cremaster is not well developed in females. Now that you just completed this video tutorial, that is time for you to continue your learning experience by testing and also applying your knowledge. There are 3 ways you can do so here at KenHub. The first one is by clicking on our Start Training button. The second one is by browsing through our related articles library. And the third one is by checking out our atlas. Now, good luck everyone, and I will see you next time. Serratus posterior superior muscle. Serratus posterior inferior muscle. Levator's costarum muscles.
Levator's costarum. This one. Oh wait, what? Sorry, these are external intercostal muscle.
External intercostal muscles. Internal intercostal muscles. Innermost intercostal muscles.
He skipped that one. What?
Subcostal muscles.
Subcostal muscles.
Transversus thoracis muscle.
Oh,
Serratus posterior inferior muscle.
अरे मेरा ऑन है क्या? Sorry. Serratus posterior inferior muscle. This one.
Serratus posterior superior muscle. External intercostal muscles.
External intercostal muscle. This one.
Levator's costarum muscles.
Levator's costarum.
Internal intercostal muscles. Transversus thoracis muscle.
Transversus thoracis muscle.
Subcostal muscles.
Subcostal muscles.
Innermost intercostal muscles.
I don't know about that one, bro. Serratus posterior superior.
Serratus posterior superior muscle.
Subcostal muscles.
Subcostal muscles.
Internal intercostal
Internal intercostal muscles.
Levator costarum.
Levator's costarum muscles.
Levator's costarum muscles. External intercostal muscles.
External intercostal muscles.
Intercostal muscles. Serratus posterior inferior.
Serratus posterior inferior muscle.
Innermost intercostal muscle.
Innermost intercostal muscles.
Why ये innermost intercostal muscle? Fuck, man. Transversus thoracis muscle.
Transversus thoracis muscle. Subclavius muscle.
Pectoralis major.
Pectoralis major muscle. Serratus anterior muscle.
Pectoralis
minor muscle. Pectoralis minor muscle. Serratus anterior muscle. Pectoralis major muscle. Subclavius muscle.
Serratus anterior
anterior muscle.
Pectoralis minor. Where the fuck is
Pectoralis minor muscle.
Subclavius muscle.
Subclavius muscle.
Pectoralis major.
Pectoralis major muscle. Levator's costarum muscles.
Laboratories costarum muscles. Finish. क्या करते हो तुम बिन बात की चिंता Head and neck. Let's check. Where the fuck muscle start? Yeah. There you go. There you go. Okay. Muscles of fascia, head and neck. Head and neck. Muscles and fascia, head and neck. Head and neck. Head and neck नहीं हुआ मेरा ठीक है. Chest, back, and abdomen. I have read all about them. Rectus abdominis. I have read about it. But yeah, yeah, I have read about it. Muscle shoulder shoulder. Yeah, I did. I think I did. Wait, let me check. Upper limb. Yeah, upper limb. Muscles. Main muscles. I did. I did. Deltoid. ज़्यादा इसमें होती नहीं. Deltoid subscapularis. Shoulder girdle की muscle. Deltoid subscapularis. Supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres major, teres minor. That's it. Yeah, I did. Okay. Then, yeah. Upper limb, yeah. Muscles of the pelvis, lower limb. Pelvis, yeah, I didn't do it. Let's do the pelvis one first. Then I'll do the, you know, bony pelvis, muscles of the pelvic floor and perineum. Yeah, I will do that now. Perineum, female perineum. Yeah, what's written there? ठीक है, यहाँ हो जाएगा फिर मेरा. फिर डाइजेस्टिव सिस्टम स्टार्ट कर दूंगा ये, और हेड एंड नेक करने के बाद डाइजेस्टिव सिस्टम प्रॉपर स्टार्ट कर दूंगा. देन दैट्स इट. फिर रेस्पिरेटरी सिस्टम है. ठीक है, हो जाएगा. इट्स नॉट दैट बैड. इट्स डूएबल. लेट्स स्टार्ट विद दीस. क्या करते हो तुम बिन बात की चिंता. ओ भाई, ओ मैं सुसु करके आया ब्रो. फक. ओ ये Let's start it, man. क्या करते हो तुम बिन बात की चिंता. Oh my god, I look huge. I don't. Right now. I will look big again soon.
Did you get your workout in today?
No,
Crunch
sorry.
those biceps. Get some squats going. What about your pelvic floor? That's right, I said pelvic floor. Did you know that you could work out those muscles too? Considering that they are the muscles that help you hold on to when you're bursting for the loo, they're pretty worth knowing about. Let's have a look at what these muscles are, and then we'll give you some tips on how to work them out. Welcome to our tutorial on the muscles of the pelvic floor. So before we get started, let me give you a quick overview of what we'll cover today. We'll begin by chatting through what the pelvic floor actually is, including its functions. We'll then move on to reviewing the bones of the pelvis, specifically focusing on the features the pelvic floor muscles attach to. Next, we'll look at the floor of the pelvis, identifying its muscles. We'll then continue to look at some other muscles in the area that are closely related to the pelvic floor, including the muscles of the pelvic walls, the muscles of the deep perineal pouch, as well as some muscles of the superficial perineal pouch, and finally, a muscle of the anal triangle. Lastly, we'll have a look at how to exercise your pelvic floor muscles before we finish off.
Krieger
Are you ready?
exercise.
Let's
Krieger.
get to it. So what is this structure that we're learning about, and what is it for? In both of these images, we can see a part of the pelvic floor highlighted in green. On the left, an image of the female pelvis, and on the right, an image of the male pelvis. In both images, we're looking at the pelvis from a right lateral view. The pelvic floor, also known as the pelvic diaphragm, is an important structure with many functions, including providing support for the pelvic organs. We can see this nicely in our images. In both sexes, it provides support for the bladder and the intestines, while in females, it provides organs. Important structure with many functions, including providing support for the pelvic organs. We can see this nicely in our images. In both sexes, it provides support for the bladder and the intestines, while in females, it also supports the uterus. Additionally, the pelvic floor helps maintain optimal intra-abdominal pressure and is involved in the pelvic floor helps maintain. It provides support. For the bladder and the intestines, while in females, it also supports the uterus. Additionally, the pelvic floor helps maintain optimal intra-abdominal pressure and is involved in urinary and fecal continence in both sexes. Okay, so let's get to identifying some of the structures. First up, a review of the bones of the pelvis. The pelvis as a whole consists of several bones that we'll look at shortly. It's also known as the pelvic girdle and connects the axial skeleton to the It's also known as the pelvic girdle and connects the axial skeleton to the lower limbs. In the midline, posteriorly, is the sacrum. The sacrum is a fusion of 5 sacral vertebrae and is attached on either side to the hip bones. Inferior to the sacrum is the most inferior part of the vertebral column, the coccyx. Later on, we'll see how some muscles of the pelvic floor attach to this structure. Now, each hip bone is actually made up of 3 bones that unite at the acetabulum, forming the socket for the hip joint. First is the largest one highlighted now, the ilium. The inferior portion of the hip bone is the ischium,
Pubis.
And finally, the anterior portion is the pubis. We'll be using this image throughout the tutorial, so let's make sure we know what bony structures we can see. This is the pelvis and the pelvic floor from a superior view. The posterior aspect is at the top of your screen, and the interior aspect is at the bottom. So posteriorly, in the midline, is the sacrum. On either side of the sacrum is an ilium. Anteriorly, we can see the two pubic bones. From this view, we can't see much of the ischium, but we can see a bony projection of the ischium called the ischial spine on each side. This is another image we're going to get very familiar with today. We're now looking at the pelvis and the pelvic floor from an inferior view. Nevertheless, the posterior aspect is at the top and the anterior aspect is at the bottom. Again, we can see the sacrum posteriorly in the midline. Projecting inferiorly from the sacrum, we can now see the coccyx. On either side of the sacrum, we can see the ilio again, and anteriorly we have the pubic bones. The ischium is much clearer from this inferior view, with the ischial spines projecting here. The other main features of the ischia that we can see are the ischial tuberosities, these large bony features projecting out towards you. All right, ready to get to the muscles? Let's start by looking at the muscles of the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is made up of the levator ani muscle, which is a combination of three muscles. The puborectalis, the pupil, which is a combination of three muscles. The puborectalis, the pubococcygeus, and the iliococcygeus. The pelvic floor also includes another muscle called the coccygeus muscle. We can see in this image that these muscles really fill that inferior portion of the pelvis. We can see in this image that these muscles really fill that inferior portion of the pelvis, where they can provide support to the pelvic organs. So let's have a look at each of these muscles in turn. First up, we can see the entire levator ani muscle highlighted in green. Remember, it consists of three muscles which more or less blend into each other: the puborectalis, the pubococcygeus, and the iliococcygeus. The first part of the levator ani we'll look at is the puborectalis. This muscle, highlighted in green, is named after its attachments and relations.
Puborectalis.
Referring to the pubic bone, and rectalis, relating to the rectum. The puborectalis originates from the posterior surface of the bodies of the pubic bones.
Bodies of the pubic bone. Posterior surface of the body of the pubic bone. Okay.
It then extends from its points of origin to form a U-shaped sling around the rectum at the anorectal junction. This is pretty different from a lot of skeletal sling around. It then extends from its points of origin to form a U-shaped sling around the rectum at the anorectal junction. This is pretty different from a lot of skeletal muscle attachments, where insertions are usually to bones. By encircling the anorectal junction, the puborectalis maintains fecal continence. When this muscle relaxes, the angle between the rectum and the anus increases, which allows for defecation to
Fecal continence.
To occur. The angle between the rectum and the contains fecal continence. When this muscle relaxes, the angle between the rectum and the anus increases, which allows for defecation to occur. You may have noticed that the puborectalis has 2 holes in it. The more posteriorly situated hole allows for the passage of the anal canal and is therefore called the anal aperture. But what about the anterior hole? This hole is termed the urogenital hiatus.
Anal aperture and urogenital hiatus.
And allows passage of the urethra in both sexes and the vagina in females. In terms of innervation, the puborectalis is supplied by the nerve to the levator ani.
Levator ani nerve.
Which arises
Innervation.
from the anterior rami of S4, sometimes with a small contribution from S5. The second component of the levator ani is the pubococcygeus. And nicely done, this muscle is also named after its attachment point. It originates from the bodies of the pubic bones lateral to the origin of the puborectalis. Posteriorly, it inserts at the coccyx, hence the anococcygeal ligament. Posteriorly, it inserts at the coccyx, hence the anococcygeal ligament. Similar to the puborectalis, it is innervated by the nerve to the levator ani.
Nerve to the levator ani.
It receives fibers from the branches of the pudendal nerve.
Pudendal nerve.
Such as the inferior rectal or the perineal branches.
Inferior rectal. Rectal or perineal nerves.
Last of the 3 components of the levator ani
pubococcygeus, puborectalis, and
is the iliococcygeus muscle.
Iliococcygeus.
Now this one.
Oh, okay. Attachments there. Puborectalis, pubococcygeus, and iliococcygeus.
One is a bit deceiving, as its name would suggest that it originates from the
Iliococcygeus. Origin?
But actually, the iliococcygeus originates from the ischium, specifically the ischial spine. as its name would suggest that it originates from the ilium, but actually, the Iliococcygeus originates from the ischium.
Ischium.
Specifically, the ischial spine.
Ischial spine से originate करती है.
It also originates from this structure here, the tendinous arch of the levator ani.
Tendinous arch or levator ani. Okay.
Luckily, on the other hand, its insertion point does match its name. Posteriorly,
Coccyx.
it inserts at the coccyx and the anococcygeal ligament. Like the rest of the levator ani, the Iliococcygeus is innervated by the nerve to the levator ani. The last muscle of the pelvic floor,
Nerve to the levator ani. अरे रुक जाओ.
which is not part of the levator ani, is the muscle we can see highlighted now. This is the coccygeus, which is sometimes
Levator ani और coccygeus दो ही तो होता है तीसरा. अरे पीछे वाली क्या है? अच्छा फ्लोर
called
के
the
लिए.
ischio-coccygeus.
Coccygeus. Fuck, man. Gotta leave early. Nature's call. टक्कर का गेम चल रहा है भाई बिल्कुल एज टू एज। हाँ अनम्यूट कर ले भाई।
राइट ट्विस्ट।
क्लच कर दिया किसने?
इसकी तो अच्छी वाली लेंगे। किसका है ये तुमको इंतजार में।
अपने में कैसे
मैं
खेल
डोल
रहे हैं लोग?
करता हूँ मेरी अल्टी है।
अच्छे खेल रहे हैं बेकार?
कौन?
सब सही खेल रहा है।
हाँ अच्छा मेरे को क्या अच्छा मेरे को ही कह रहा था क्या यार इसीलिए सोवा तो है ना अपने पास। ये फिर क्लोज आया भाई। पाइप्स इसका स्कैन जाता कहाँ है दिखता ही नहीं कभी।
ओ
हो
मैंने अब देखा तेरा वो ऑफ वाला शॉट।
किसका है ये तुमको।
भाई इसके बगल में से निकल गया क्या वो? हाँ ये कमबैक हो गया क्या?
एक गोली वन बुलेट एंड ड्रीम करूंगा इसके साथ। दिखाओ बस कहाँ पे। अबे साला इधर ही है। इसने स्मोक अब वो ऊपर ही नहीं देखेगा। मेरे को तो इसी के अंदर लग रहा है इसके अंदर ही है।
मार दिया गया। तेरी लेटेंसी बहुत ज्यादा है पे नॉर्म।
अबे उसको 2x पे चला ना स्ट्रीम को एक काम कर डबल पे चला पहले फिर
डबल
सही हो जाएगा।
स्पीड पे।
हम्म
अच्छा चलो।
मैं ना मिड होल्ड करता हूँ थोड़ी देर के लिए
हो गया हो गया हो
अगर
गया।
कोई पुश करने की कोशिश करे। अंडर ट्यूब देख रहा हूँ मैं। किसका है तुमको इंतजार में देख लो इधर को। आजकल यार ऑपिंग ही नहीं हो रही मेरे से। हो रही है हो रही है।
हो रही है हो रही है।
ए, क्या क्या हो गया। ओपन है क्या। और नॉट ऑन नॉट ऑन।
ओ भाई अच्छा मारा बे वो शॉट ही।
नाइस लेना ऑफ ले भाई 2 पिक्स भाई ठीक है मैं थ्रो कर। हो गया भाई मेरा हो गया भाई मेरा मैं थ्रो कर रहा हूँ।
मैं शॉट ही काम आ गई
किसका
बे
है
तेरी।
ये तुम भाई इतना क्या हंसी है अब मुझे हंसी हो रही है पहले नहीं आ रही थी मुझे इस पे हंसी। किसका है ये तुमको इंतजार में हूं ना।
चलो गाइस म्यूट कर ले अब। मैं म्यूट कर रहा हूँ बाय।
अब राउंड के बीच में कैसे।
नेक्स्ट हाँ कोई नहीं राउंड के बाद कर लियो। नेक्स्ट 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 आई मीन नेक्स्ट मैच आ जाऊंगा मोस्टली मैं 1 घंटे में आ रहा हूँ।
मेरा तो चल 2 मिनट में खत्म होने वाला।
हाँ, एक और लगा लियो तो।
चलो भागते हैं क्या हो गया।
This muscle originates from the ischial.
Everyone.
Ischio-coccygeus.
मेरे को
Ischio-coccygeum.
everyone सुना तो confidence आ गया.
Ischial spine. Wait, so is iliococcygeus originate ischial spine? All.
इसकी तो गलती है.
Wait. Tendinous arc of levator ani. Oh my god.
Oh. He broke your wall implant.
Spine and travels posteriorly to insert on the coccyx and inferior portion of the sacrum.
Anti. अच्छा जो जिसने बोला एवरीवन यार वो कौन था? अगर मैं जिंदा होता ना अभी तो ये राउंड निकल जाता. शेर 2 को मारता, मैं 2 को मारता, राउंड अपना होता. पर किसी ने कहा एवरीवन हियर तो हम राउंड हार गए.
From this inferior view, we can see the insertion of the coccygeus, which is highlighted onto the coccyx and the sacrum. The coccygeus.
अब म्यूट कर ले साले.
चलो हो गया.
अब म्यूट कर ले प्लीज. Inferior portion of the sacrum.
Which is highlighted on. From this inferior view, we can see the insertion of the coccygeus, which is highlighted onto the coccyx and the sacrum. The coccygeus overlies the sacrospinous ligament, which
Sacrospinous ligament.
we've just added to the image now. This ligament has
I don't get that one, bro.
similar attachment points. The sacrum and the ischial spine. Sometimes this muscle and its tendon can fuse together. The coccygeus, as part of the pelvic floor, functions by pulling the coccyx anteriorly after defecation.
Tactical gameplay भाई. EU level है, तुम नहीं समझोगे. अब वो रेस 30 किल मार गए. इको हम लोग का. इको तो नहीं है. हाँ बस हाफ शील्ड खेल रहा हूँ. नहीं. गाइस ए छोड़ दिया बिना साउंड दिए. इसको कॉल सुन ली गाइस. बी जाओ. बी आ गए तो. ओमन पिक ले ओमन. अबे ले एक किचन है. क्या कर रहा है किचन में बंदा है. अबे सुनो तो सालो.
अब म्यूट कर ले यार. भाई अब म्यूट कर ले यार प्लीज. भोसड़ी हर बार हाँ यही ना बात.
In other species, its primary function is actually movement of the tail. In other species, functions by pulling the coccyx anteriorly after defecation. In other species, its primary function is actually movement of the tail. It is innervated by the nerve to the levator ani. Just like the muscles of the levator ani, which make up the rest of the pelvic floor. And before we move on, let me remind you of the functions of the pelvic floor. These muscles work together to provide support for the pelvic organs. Additionally, the pelvic floor helps maintain optimal intra-abdominal pressure and is involved in urinary and fecal continence in both sexes.
Provide support for pelvic organ, maintain optimal intra-abdominal pressure, urinary and fecal continence. Yeah, that's what I wrote, man.
There are 2 additional muscles that aren't technically part of the pelvic floor, but help to form the walls of the pelvic cavity. Let's take a look at them now. First up, we'll look at the muscle highlighted now, which is the piriformis. Superior and posterior to the coccygeus, this muscle originates medially from the anterior surface of the sacrum and travels out of the pelvis laterally to the greater trochanter of the femur.
Posterior hip muscles. Yeah.
You can see in this image now how the piriformis makes up the posterolateral wall of the pelvic cavity.
Posterolateral wall.
With the
Understandable.
pelvis laterally to the greater trochanter of the femur. You can see in this image now how the piriformis makes up the posterolateral wall of the pelvic cavity. This muscle is a lateral rotator and abductor of the thigh.
Lateral rotator. What's lateral rotation? Lateral. Ah, man. What? Lateral rotator means external rotator, right? Where is it inserted?
And is innervated by the nerve to the piriformis.
The nerve to levator ani.
The second muscle, which forms part of the anterolateral wall of the pelvic cavity, is the obturator internus. Similar to the piriformis,
Obturator internus. Anterolateral wall.
It originates within the pelvis and exits to insert
Lateral rotation. External rotation, I guess.
on the femur, specifically the obturator within the pelvis, obturator internus. Similar to the piriformis, it originates within the pelvis and exits to insert on the femur. Specifically, the obturator internus originates from the posterior surface of the obturator membrane.
Posterior surface of obturator membrane. Yeah.
And the surrounding bone. Internus originates from the posterior surface of the obturator membrane and the surrounding bone. And inserts on the greater trochanter of the femur.
Insert on the greater trochanter of femur.
Just like the piriformis, it is a lateral rotator and abductor of the thigh.
Lateral rotator and abductor of thigh. How the fuck is it an abductor? Okay, I got it. फुलक्रम इसका यहाँ है ना नीचे पे इधर से खींचेगा तो ऊपर हो जाएगा. It's inefficient, I'd say.
But its innervation comes from the nerve to the obturator internus.
Nerve to the obturator internus. Rotation along the long axis of the joint. Long axis of the joint. Okay, it can be. It can be. External, internal. To think of that moon. Right, external rotation, right. Then why the fuck are you not saying it?
Okay, so now that we've covered the muscles of the pelvic floor and the walls, we're going to move inferiorly to identify some more muscles in this region. What we can see here is the levator ani, which we know makes up part of the pelvic floor and supports all of these pelvic organs. Inferior to the levator ani, we can see some more muscles. These are the muscles of the perineum. We can see some more all of these pelvic organs. Inferior to the levator ani, we can see some more muscles. These are the muscles of the perineum. The perineum is a diamond-shaped space.
Perineum. Pelvic floor and perineum are two different things, okay.
Inferior to the levator ani between the thighs. The 4 points of this diamond are the coccyx posteriorly, the pubic symphysis anteriorly,
Pubic symphysis, coccyx,
and the two ischial tuberosities
ischial
laterally.
tuberosity
If we
laterally.
connect the dots along the ischiopubic rami and along the sacrotuberous ligament, ligaments, we have our diamond shaped along the ischiopubic rami, and along the sacrotuberous ligaments, we have our diamond-shaped perineum. The perineum can then be divided into two triangles by drawing a line between the two ischial tuberosities. This forms an anterior urogenital triangle, which contains structures related to the urinary and genital tracts, and a posterior anal triangle, which contains structures related to the intestinal tract. Within the urogenital triangle, we can further divide the space into two parts. In this image, we're looking at the female pelvis and perineum that has been cut in the coronal plane. This is the bladder, sitting within the pelvis, which is bounded inferiorly by the pelvic floor. Inferior to the pelvic floor is the perineum, and since we're located anteriorly, we're in the
Anteriorly, urogenital triangle.
Urogenital triangle.
Urogenital
The dividing
triangle.
line between the two spaces within the urogenital triangle is this structure here, which is the perineal membrane. The perineal membrane divides the urogenital triangle into two parts. The superior deep perineal pouch and the inferior superficial perineal pouch. Perineal membrane divides and the inferior into two parts, the superior deep perineal pouch and the inferior superficial perineal pouch. So from the pelvic floor, as we move inferiorly to the urogenital triangle, we find the deep perineal pouch, then the perineal membrane, and inferior to that, the superficial perineal pouch. Okay, time to get back to the muscles. Let's start with the muscles in the deep perineal pouch. This pouch contains two muscles, the deep transverse perineal muscle and the external urethral sphincter.
External urethral sphincter and deep transverse perineal muscle.
First, we'll have a look at the perineal and the external urethral sphincter. Two muscles, the deep transverse perineal muscle and the external urethral sphincter. First, we'll have a look at the deep transverse perineal muscles, which you can now see highlighted in green. We're looking at the pelvis from that inferior view we've seen a few times so far, but now the muscles of the pelvic floor are covered anteriorly by these perineal muscles. The deep transverse perineal muscle, which is quite a mouthful, is exactly as its name suggests. It is a deep muscle, but don't worry, there are more muscles that we'll add superficially soon. It runs transversely from the ramus of each ischium to insert at the walls of the vagina in females, from the ramus of each ischium to insert at the walls of the vagina in females, the prostate in males, and the perineal body in both sexes. And finally, it's a muscle of the perineum. The deep transverse perineal muscle functions to provide support to the pelvic floor, which remember is superior to this muscle. It also stabilizes the perineal body.
What is the perineal body?
It is innervated by the deep perineal nerve, which is a branch of the pudendal nerve. The second muscle of the urogenital diaphragm is the external urethral sphincter, which we can now see highlighted in green towards the anterior aspect of the perineum. This sphincter encircles the membranous portion of the urethra, keeping it compressed to maintain urinary continence until it is membranous.
Encircles membranous urethra.
Portion of the urethra, keeping it compressed to maintain urinary continence until it is voluntarily relaxed for micturition. Also known as urination. The external urethral sphincter is innervated by the deep perineal nerve. Now we'll move inferiorly again to have a look at the muscles of the superficial perineal pouch. These muscles are located superficial or inferior to the muscles of the deep perineal pouch we were just looking at. Superficial or of the superficial perineal pouch. These muscles are located superficial or inferior to the muscles of the deep perineal pouch we were just looking at. The first lies across the posterior border of the urogenital triangle. This is the superficial transverse perineal muscle. This
Superficial transverse perineal muscle.
This muscle, similar to its deep counterpart, travels transversely across the perineum. It originates from the ischium.
I forgot the name. Deep transverse perineum. Deep perineal. Deep transverse perineal. Superficial transverse
tuberosity on each side and inserts medially on the perineal body. This muscle functions to stabilize the perineal body.
Where is perineal
similar
body?
to its deep tuberosity on each side and inserts medially on the perineal body. This muscle functions to stabilize the perineal body and is innervated by the deep perineal. Nerve. Here we can see the first of two erectile muscles that we'll look at today. This is the bulbospongiosus.
First of two erectile? What?
Innervated by the deep perineal nerve. Here we can see the first of two erectile muscles that we'll look at today. Here we can see the first of two by the deep perineal nerve. Here we can see the first of two erectile muscles that we'll look at today. This is the bulbospongiosus.
Sus.
As seen in a female. And we'll have a look at the specifics for males shortly. This muscle originates from the perineal body in females. In this coronal section of the female pelvis, we can see the levator ani here, making up the pelvic floor. Inferior to that is the deep
Coccygeus.
transverse perineal muscle, which we can see running between the two ischial bones.
Then perineal
On
membrane.
either side of the urethral orifice are the vestibular bulbs. Covering each vestibular bulb is a bulbospongiosus muscle. The vestibular bulbs are the anterior insertion points for the paired bulbospongiosus muscle.
Vestibular bulbs.
Vestibular bulbs are the anterior insertion points for the paired bulbospongiosus muscle in females. The muscle runs along them and inserts on the anterior portion. This muscle also inserts at the perineal membrane. The body of the clitoris
Perineal membrane. Where the fuck is perineal Oh. What?
This muscle also inserts at the perineal membrane. The body of the clitoris and the corpus cavernosum. The body of the clitoris and the corpus cavernosum. As for the function, it assists in the erection of the clitoris and the bulb of the vestibule, and
Erection of the clitoris and bulb of the vestibule.
supports the perineal body. The bulbous spongiosis is innervated by the deep perineal nerve.
Muscle bulbospongiosis.
The bulbospongiosis muscle also exists in males, but is a little bit different. The paired muscles in males unite along the midline at the penile raphe, as there is no vaginal opening. They therefore originate from the perineal body and the penile raphe in males. In males, the bulbospongiosis runs along the corpus spongiosum and inserts onto its anterior portion. It also inserts at the perineal membrane, the corpus cavernosum, and the fascia of the bulb of the penis. The corpus cavernosum and the fascia of the bulb of the penis. In males, the bulbospongiosis muscle compresses the bulb of the penis during urination and ejaculation. Assists in erection of the penis and supports the perineal body. Just like the bulbospongiosis muscle in females, it is innervated by the deep perineal nerve. The second of the erectile muscles is the paired ischiocavernosus.
Ischiocavernosus.
This muscle has more similarities between males and females. In both males and females, this muscle originates from the ischial ramus. In females, the ischiocavernosus covers the crus of the clitoris. And like the bulbospongiosis, this muscle assists in erection of the clitoris. In males, the ischiocavernosus covers the crus of the penis, which we can see in this coronal section of the male pelvis. Like the bulbospongiosis, this muscle assists in erection of the penis. In both sexes, this muscle is innervated by the deep perineal nerve. And now, let's move posteriorly to the anal triangle of the perineum to identify our final muscle of this tutorial. This is the external anal sphincter, which as we know is located in the anal triangle.
Wait, we just urethral. Wait, external urethral sphincter. ऐसा सी हाँ
of the perineum. The external anal sphincter originates from the skin and fascia surrounding the anus and is anchored to the perineal body and the anococcygeal ligament. This
चल रहा है क्या?
हेलो हेलो
खेल रहा है?
हाँ बस 5 मिनट 5 मिनट में ठीक है.
This muscle, as I'm sure you can guess, maintains fecal continence. We can voluntarily relax this muscle.
क्या कह रहा है?
हैंग हो गया, मैं डिस्कॉर्ड कॉल है ना.
हाँ.
और किया तो हैंग हो गया.
हाँ वो होता.
To allow us, main body and the anococcygeal ligament.
हाँ?
चलेगा नहीं चलेगा?
क्या?
हैंग हो गया ना.
तो रीस्टार्ट कर ले. तेरी स्ट्रीम चल रही है क्या? देख अरे तो वो खोल ले, टास्क मैनेजर खोल ले, कंट्रोल ऑल्ट डिलीट.
वो भी नहीं खोल रहा.
कंट्रोल शिफ्ट एस्केप दबा दे, टास्क मैनेजर खुल जाएगा.
This muscle, as I'm sure you can guess, maintains
हाँ?
नहीं खुल रहा.
तो रिस्टार्ट ही करना पड़ेगा फिर।
fecal continence.
चलो फिर भाई मैं तो निकल रिस्टार्ट करना पड़ेगा।
आजा इतने बंद नहीं होगी स्ट्रीम, इतनी जल्दी नहीं होती, तो आके वो भी चालू कर दिया जरा जल्दी से।
We can voluntarily relax this muscle to allow for
या पॉज स्ट्रीम कर दे।
defecation. This view of the external anal sphincter allows us to see its inferior relationship to the pelvic floor. The external anal sphincter is innervated by the inferior rectal nerve, which is a branch of the pudendal nerve. All right, the parts that you've all been waiting for. How to exercise your pelvic floor. The pelvic floor can be weakened in various
Kegel
ways,
exercises.
including by childbirth or being overweight. With weak pelvic floor muscles can come urinary and or fecal incontinence, but Kegel exercises can help improve this. So what are these exercises? To find these muscles, 1. Stop urinating midstream. The muscles you use to do this are your pelvic floor muscles. 2. Empty your bladder first, then lie on your back and tighten your pelvic floor muscles. 3. Hold the contractions for 5 seconds. And 4. Relax for 5 seconds. 5. Repeat 4 to 5 times. Not too harsh of a workout, eh? Hopefully you won't be sweating too much after this one. And now you're an expert on the pelvic floor muscles. Before I let you go, let's have a quick review of what we covered today. First, we looked at the pelvic floor itself, also called the pelvic diaphragm, which is made up of the levator ani and the coccygeus. We looked at the 3 parts of the levator ani, identifying each of them. The puborectalis muscle is the first part of the levator ani that we looked at. The puborectalis muscle is the first part of the levator ani that we looked at, running from the pubic bone and forming a sling around the rectum. We then identified the second part, the pubococcygeus, travelling from the pubic bone all the way to the coccyx posteriorly. The last part of the levator ani, the iliococcygeus, is the odd one that actually travels from the ischium, rather than the ilium as its name suggests, posteriorly to the coccyx. And finally, we identified the coccygeus, which is not part of the levator ani, but still makes up a part of the pelvic floor. Next up, we looked at the muscles that are part of the pelvic wall. First up was the piriformis, which makes up the posterolateral portion of the wall. Anterolaterally, we found the obturator internus. We then moved to the perineum and started identifying muscles within the deep perineal pouch, which is immediately inferior to the pelvic floor. This broad muscle is the deep transverse perineal muscle, travelling transversely between the 2 ischial rami. Anteriorly, we found the external urethral sphincter, which maintains urinary continence. The next group of muscles we looked at were in the superficial perineal pouch, which is immediately inferior to the deep perineal pouch. Within this pouch, in the urogenital triangle, we identified 3 pairs of muscles. The first was the superficial transverse perineal muscle. The second was the bulbospongiosus, which meets in the midline in males. And finally, the last muscle we looked at was the ischiocavernosus, which runs from the ischium and inserts on the crus of the penis or the clitoris. The final muscle of the tutorial was found posteriorly in the anal triangle. This is where we identified the external anal sphincter, which maintains fecal continence. And that brings us to the end of our tutorial on the muscles of the pelvic floor. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching me, and happy studying.
That was. I'll take a break later, man. It's done.
Levator ani muscle. Puborectalis muscle. Iliococcygeus muscle. Pubococcygeus muscle.
इटली आएगा.
Superficial transverse perineal muscle.
Deep transverse perineal muscle.
Iliococcygeus muscle.
Iliococcygeus muscle. विषम से होता है लेकिन.
Puborectalis muscle.
Puborectalis. Oh fuck. Oh fuck. This one.
Levator ani muscle.
Levator ani muscle.
Pubococcygeus muscle.
Pubococcygeus muscle. Pubococcygeus muscle.
Levator ani muscle.
Levator ani muscle.
Deep transverse perineal muscle. Superficial transverse perineal muscle. Puborectalis muscle. Puborectalis muscle.
Nom 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 nom. Pubococcygeal.
Pubococcygeus muscle.
Iliococcygeus muscle.
Iliococcygeus muscle.
Levator ani.
Levator ani muscle.
That's iliococcygeal.
Iliococcygeus muscle.
Coccygeus, not coccygeal. Is the superficial transverse perineal muscle. That's deep? Oh,
Deep
fuck.
transverse perineal muscle.
I forget, man. I forget everything. Fuck. I forget that. Okay. So this one is pubococcygeal muscle.
Pubococcygeus muscle.
This one is superficial.
Superficial transverse perineal muscle. External urethral sphincter.
External anal
External anal sphincter.
sphincter.
Bulbospongiosus muscle.
Muscle.
Ischiocavernosus muscle.
Ischiocavernosus muscle.
Obturator internus muscle.
Obturator internus.
Coccygeus muscle.
Coccygeus muscle. Fuck, man.
Levator ani muscle. Piriformis muscle. Ischiocavernosus muscle. External urethral sphincter. Bulbospongiosus muscle. External anal sphincter. Levator ani muscle. Coccygeus muscle. Obturator internus muscle. Piriformis muscle.
Ischiocavernosus muscle.
Ischiocavernosus muscle.
External anal sphincter.
External anal sphincter.
Bulbospongiosus muscle.
Bulbospongiosus muscle.
External urethral
External urethral sphincter.
sphincter. Piriformis
Piriformis muscle.
muscle. Levator ani.
Levator ani muscle.
Coccygeus muscle.
Coccygeus muscle.
Obturator internus.
Obturator internus muscle. Levator ani muscle. Puborectalis muscle.
Puborectalis. This one is the intern deep. Deep.
Deep transverse perineal muscle.
क्या हुआ? क्या हुआ?
हाँ?
क्या हो गया?
अरे वो एक वीडियो देख रहा था।
अच्छा अच्छा, हो गया अबे मेरा।
चुरा के दिल में आइए,
चुरा के दिल मेरा,
चुरा के दिल मेरा करिया चले।
चलो बाय बाय बोलते हैं।